What happens when the person sworn to protect your community becomes its greatest threat? When the watchful eye that's supposed to keep you safe is actually deciding who deserves to live? In the quiet suburbs of Millbrook Heights, where perfectly manicured lawns hide perfectly dark secrets, the line between protector and predator has never been thinner. The first thing you notice about Richard Blackwell is his smile. It's the kind of warm, reassuring smile that wins elections and sells insurance policies. The kind that makes worried mothers feel safer when he patrols their streets at night, clipboard in hand, radio crackling on his belt. For 3 years, he's been the unofficial sheriff of Millbrook Heights, the self-appointed guardian angel of their pristine suburban paradise. But angels, as any theologian will tell you, can fall. Sarah Martinez had always been grateful for the neighborhood watch. Moving to Millbrook Heights 2 years ago with her 8-year-old daughter Emma had felt like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting. Tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and Richard Blackwell's reassuring presence made the mortgage payments worth every penny. The divorce had been messy, the custody battle messier, but here in this bubble of suburban tranquility, she could finally breathe. That was before the accident started. The first was Mrs. Chen, the elderly widow who lived 3 houses down. She'd been found at the bottom of her basement stairs on a Tuesday morning, her neck twisted at an impossible angle. The EMTs said she'd probably been carrying laundry when she fell. Richard was the first on the scene, having noticed her newspapers piling up during his morning rounds. He'd climbed through a back window to check on her, his face grave with concern as he called 911. Such a tragedy, he told Sarah at the impromptu memorial service the neighbors organized. She was getting so frail. I kept telling her she should consider assisted living, but you know how stubborn the elderly can be. Sarah had nodded sympathetically, touched by his obvious care for their community. She didn't think much about Mrs. Chen's complaints at the last homeowners association meeting about those people moving into the neighborhood, or how she'd specifically mentioned the Martinez family's loud music and foreign cooking smells. The second accident happened 6 weeks later. Tommy Reeves, the teenager who'd been spray painting gang tags on the community mailboxes, was found dead in the retention pond behind the elementary school. The official cause was drowning, with high levels of alcohol in his system. Another tragic accident, everyone agreed. A troubled kid who'd been drinking alone and gotten too close to the water's edge. Richard organized a community meeting about teen substance abuse. He spoke passionately about protecting their children, about maintaining the values that made Millbrook Heights special. Sarah found herself nodding along with everyone else, impressed by his dedication. She might have continued believing in Richard's benevolent leadership, if not for the night she couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m. when insomnia drove her to the kitchen for chamomile tea. Through the window above her sink, she watched Richard's silhouette moving through the Hendersons' backyard. The Hendersons were out of town. She'd seen them loading their SUV that morning, talking about visiting relatives in Phoenix. Richard moved with purpose, not like someone on a routine patrol. He was carrying something, though the darkness made it impossible to see what. Sarah told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe he'd seen something suspicious and was investigating. That was his job, after all. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and doubt has a way of growing in fertile soil. The third accident eliminated any remaining faith she had in coincidence. David Kim owned the house at the corner of Maple and 3rd. He was a software engineer who worked from home, a quiet man who kept to himself but always waved when Sarah walked Emma to school. His only crime, as far as Sarah could tell, was owning a house that wasn't quite up to the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. His lawn wasn't manicured enough, his car wasn't new enough, and he'd been cited twice by the HOA for not bringing his garbage cans in quickly enough after pickup. David was found dead in his garage on a Saturday morning, carbon monoxide poisoning from a car that had been left running all night. Another accident, another tragedy, another opportunity for Richard to console the community and promise that he'd do everything in his power to keep them safe. But Sarah remembered David mentioning at the community barbecue that his car had been having starter problems. She remembered him saying he'd been taking the bus to avoid getting stranded somewhere when the engine wouldn't turn over. Why would someone with a car that barely started leave it running all night? That's when she started paying attention. Really paying attention. Richard Blackwell had moved to Millbrook Heights 5 years ago, a recently retired police officer looking for a quieter life. He'd been divorced, no children, and threw himself into community involvement with the fervor of a man who needed purpose. The neighborhood watch had been his idea, born from a genuine desire to help, or so everyone believed. Sarah began researching the victims, if that's what they were. Mrs. Chen had been feuding with the HOA about her overgrown garden. Tommy Reeves had been caught vandalizing property. David Kim had been behind on his HOA dues and had received multiple citations. Each death removed someone Richard considered a problem, a blight on the community's perfection. The pattern became clearer the more she looked. Richard didn't just patrol the neighborhood, he curated it. Like a gardener pruning unwanted growth, he eliminated the elements that didn't fit his vision of suburban paradise. Sarah's blood ran cold when she realized she might be next. Her lawn hadn't been edged in 2 weeks. Emma's bicycle had been left on the front yard overnight 3 times this month. Just yesterday, Richard had stopped by with a gentle reminder about the community noise ordinance after Emma had friends over for a birthday party. His smile had been as warm as ever, but there had been something else in his eyes. Something calculating. She started documenting everything. Richard's patrol schedule, which she tracked from her bedroom window. His interactions with neighbors, the subtle ways he identified problems that needed solving. She took photos when she could, though he was careful never to do anything obviously suspicious in daylight. The breakthrough came when she was going through David Kim's social media posts. 3 weeks before his death, he'd posted about reporting suspicious activity to the police. Someone had been in his yard at night, and he'd found evidence that his garage had been tampered with. The post had only 2 comments. One from a neighbor offering sympathy, the other from Richard Blackwell, asking David to call him directly next time instead of bothering the overworked police department. Sarah's hands shook as she read the exchange. David had trusted Richard, had probably let him into his garage, had maybe even mentioned the problems with his car. Richard would have known exactly how to stage the scene, how to make it look like David had simply forgotten to turn off his engine. That night, Sarah couldn't bring herself to turn off the lights. She sat in her living room with the curtains drawn, watching Richard's flashlight beam move through the neighborhood like a predator's eyes in the dark. When the beam lingered on her house, she held her breath until it moved on. She had to do something, but what? The police would think she was paranoid. Richard was one of them, after all, a retired officer with an exemplary service record. The deaths looked like accidents because they were perfectly orchestrated to look like accidents. Without concrete evidence, she'd just be another hysterical single mother, spinning conspiracy theories about the neighborhood's beloved guardian. The next morning brought both opportunity and terror in equal measure. Richard knocked on her door at 8 a.m. sharp, that familiar warm smile in place, but Sarah could see the calculation behind his eyes. "Morning, Sarah. I wanted to talk to you about some concerns I have." She forced herself to smile back, to play the role of the grateful neighbor. "Of course, Richard. What's going on?" "Well, I've noticed some irregularities in your routine lately. Late nights with the lights on, taking photos around the neighborhood. I'm worried you might be experiencing some anxiety. It's completely understandable. Single mothers face a lot of stress." The words were caring, but the delivery was cold. He knew she was onto him. "I've just been having trouble sleeping," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Sometimes I check on the neighbors when I'm up. You know how it is." "I do." His smile never wavered. "That's actually why I wanted to suggest something. There's been some concern about Emma's behavior at school. Nothing serious, just some attention-seeking that often happens after family disruption. I know a wonderful child psychologist. Dr. Matthews works with many of the families here in Millbrook Heights." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Richard was setting up his narrative. The stressed single mother who'd been acting paranoid. The troubled child who'd been acting out. When they found Sarah's body, it would look like suicide. The guilt over failing Emma. The pressure of single parenthood. The isolation of being new to the community. Everyone would understand. Everyone would believe Richard's version of events. "That's very thoughtful," she managed to say. "Let me think about it." "Of course. No rush. But Sarah?" His eyes locked onto hers with predatory intensity. "I want you to know that I'm here for you. This community takes care of its own. We don't let anyone fall through the cracks." After he left, Sarah's hands shook so badly she could barely dial the phone. She called in sick to work, picked Emma up from school early with a story about a family emergency, and drove directly to her sister's house 3 towns over. "You can stay as long as you need," Maria said, not asking questions Sarah wasn't ready to answer. "But honey, are you sure you're not just stressed? This Richard guy sounds like he's trying to help." That night, safe in Maria's guest room with Emma sleeping beside her, Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. She was going back to Millbrook Heights, but not to hide. She was going to end Richard's reign of suburban terror. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Richard's strength was his reputation, his position of trust within the community. But that same trust would be his weakness if she could expose him publicly, in front of witnesses who couldn't be dismissed or eliminated. She waited until the monthly HOA meeting, the one event where the entire community would be gathered in one place. Richard always used these meetings to reinforce his authority, to remind everyone of the threats he protected them from. Tonight, he'd face a threat he hadn't anticipated. Sarah arrived early, her laptop bag containing everything she'd compiled over the past weeks. Photos, timeline analyses, copies of the victim's social media posts, and HOA violations. She'd even driven past Richard's house the night before and photographed the collection of personal items she'd seen through his garage window. Mrs. Chen's reading glasses, Tommy Reeves's spray paint cans, David Kim's HOA citation notices, trophies from his kills, carelessly displayed because he never imagined anyone would look. The meeting began with the usual routine: budget discussions, landscaping proposals, complaints about parking violations. Richard stood at the front of the room in his crisp polo shirt and khakis, the very picture of suburban authority. When he began his security report, detailing the recent tragic accidents and his efforts to prevent similar incidents, Sarah stood up. "I'd like to add something to the security discussion," she said, her voice carrying across the community center. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Sarah. We always welcome community input." "I've been doing some research into the recent deaths in our neighborhood," she began, opening her laptop, "and I've found some very disturbing patterns." The room grew quiet. Neighbors who'd been half listening to the usual HOA minutiae suddenly focused on the drama unfolding before them. Mrs. Chen, Tommy Reeves, and David Kim all had one thing in common, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. They were all considered problems by our HOA. They all received citations or complaints, and they all died after expressing concerns about suspicious activity in their yards. "Sarah," Richard interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, "I think we discussed your recent anxiety. Maybe we should table this discussion for—" "David Kim posted on Facebook about someone tampering with his garage 3 weeks before he died," Sarah said, projecting the screenshot onto the wall. "Richard, you commented on that post, asking David to call you directly instead of the police. Why would you do that?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors looked confused, others concerned. Richard's smile never wavered, but Sarah could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. "I was trying to help a neighbor," he said smoothly. David was new to the community and didn't understand our informal approach to handling minor issues. Minor issues like someone breaking into his garage and rigging his car to kill him? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several neighbors gasped. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Street stood up. "Sarah, that's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" Sarah clicked to the next slide, photos of Richard's garage, taken through his window the night before. The reading glasses that had belonged to Mrs. Chen were clearly visible on a workbench next to spray paint cans and HOA violation notices. "These items belonged to the 3 people who died," she said. "I took these photos through Richard's garage window last night. Why would our neighborhood watch coordinator be keeping trophies from the victims? The room erupted in shocked whispers. Richard's composure finally cracked, his friendly mask slipping to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "This is harassment," he said, his voice no longer gentle. "Sarah Martinez has been exhibiting increasingly paranoid behavior over the past month. She's been stalking me, taking unauthorized photographs, spreading wild conspiracy theories. I've been trying to help her, but clearly she needs professional intervention." "Then you won't mind if we call the police to examine those items?" Sarah asked. "If they're innocent souvenirs, you should have no problem explaining how you came to possess the personal belongings of 3 dead neighbors." That's when Richard made his fatal mistake. Instead of maintaining his facade of concern and cooperation, he did what predators do when cornered. He attacked. "You want to know the truth?" he snarled, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. "This neighborhood was perfect before people like you started moving in. Mrs. Chen with her rotting garden and her complaints about American neighbors, Tommy Reeves with his gang symbols and his drugs, David Kim with his slovenly house bringing down everyone's property values, and now you, a divorced single mother who can't control her child or maintain her property, spreading lies and discord in our community." The mask had completely fallen away, revealing the monster underneath. But Richard wasn't finished. "I've given everything to protect this community," he continued, his voice rising. "I've sacrificed my time, my energy, my own safety to keep our neighborhood pure, to maintain the standards that make it worth living here. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. Sometimes you have to remove the diseased branches before they infect the whole tree." "Oh my God," whispered Mrs. Patterson. "You actually killed them." The confession hung in the air, witnessed by 47 neighbors who could no longer pretend that their guardian angel was anything but a predator. Cell phones appeared throughout the room, recording the moment when Richard Blackwell's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "You'll never understand," he said, his voice now eerily calm. "None of you have the strength to do what needs to be done. You're all content to watch this place decay, to let the wrong sort of people drag down everything we've built. But I've been keeping watch. I've been making the hard choices." That's when he reached for the gun. Sarah had wondered why he'd chosen such elaborate methods for his previous victims, when a simple shooting would have been more efficient. Now she understood. Richard was a showman, a perfectionist who took pride in his elaborate schemes. The gun was for emergencies only, for when his careful plans fell apart. But 47 witnesses with cell phones don't make for easy targets. As Richard fumbled for his weapon, 3 of the neighbors tackled him. Mr. Hendricks from Elm Street, a former Marine, had Richard pinned and disarmed before he could clear leather. The police arrived 18 minutes later, responding to multiple 911 calls. They found Richard Blackwell zip-tied to a folding chair with evidence of 3 murders being live-streamed to Facebook by half the Millbrook Heights Homeowners Association. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Richard's activities. The trophies in his garage were just the beginning. Hidden cameras throughout the neighborhood, detailed files on every resident's habits and schedules, and a notebook ranking neighbors by their contribution to community standards. Sarah's name was circled in red on the immediate action required list. The trial made national news. The suburban serial killer who'd hidden behind community service, the neighborhood watch coordinator who'd watched too closely and acted too decisively. Richard's defense team tried to paint him as a man who'd snapped under pressure, but the evidence revealed years of careful planning and patient execution. During the sentencing hearing, Richard finally showed genuine emotion. Not remorse for his victims, but rage at the community that had turned on him. "I protected you," he screamed at the packed courtroom, several Millbrook Heights residents in attendance. "I kept your property values high, your streets safe, your community pure. And this is how you repay me? By believing the lies of some paranoid single mother who doesn't belong here anyway?" Even in defeat, he couldn't see his victims as human beings deserving of life. They remained, in his twisted perspective, problems that had required solutions. The judge sentenced Richard Blackwell to life without parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. In her closing remarks, She addressed the broader implications of the case. The defendant has claimed he was protecting his community, Judge Morrison said. But protection becomes persecution when we decide that some people are more deserving of safety than others. When we give anyone the power to determine who belongs and who doesn't, we risk creating monsters like the one before us today. Sarah never moved back to Millbrook Heights. The house she'd thought represented safety and stability had become a symbol of how thin the veneer of suburban civilization really was. She and Emma relocated to a diverse neighborhood across town, where perfection was less important than genuine community. The Millbrook Heights Neighborhood Watch was officially disbanded. Property values did drop, as Richard had predicted they would. Some residents moved away, unable to reconcile their memory of their quiet community with the reality of what had been happening in their midst. Others stayed, determined to rebuild something healthier from the ashes of Richard's vision of suburban purity. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been elected president of the reformed HOA, implemented new policies focused on inclusion rather than exclusion. Violation notices were replaced with offers of assistance. Community events emphasized diversity rather than conformity. The neighborhood Richard had tried so hard to preserve transformed into something he would have hated, a place where differences were celebrated rather than eliminated. Sarah sometimes drives through Millbrook Heights when she's in that part of town. The lawns aren't quite as perfect anymore, but children play in yards without fear, and neighbors talk to each other with genuine warmth rather than suspicious scrutiny. The community center where Richard's mask finally slipped now hosts diversity festivals and mental health awareness seminars. In the end, his reign of terror had lasted 3 years and claimed 3 lives, but his legacy would be the reminder that vigilance must always be tempered with humanity, that protection without compassion becomes persecution, that communities are strongest not when they exclude the undesirable, but when they embrace the full spectrum of human experience. The most chilling aspect of Richard's crimes wasn't their brutality, but their banality. He hadn't killed in passion or desperation. He'd murdered methodically, systematically, with the same attention to detail he'd brought to organizing block parties and coordinating patrol schedules. Evil, Sarah realized, doesn't always announce itself with dramatic gestures and obvious malice. Sometimes it hides behind a warm smile and a clipboard, behind good intentions and community service, behind the very systems we trust to keep us safe. The neighborhood watch had been watching, all right. The question no one had thought to ask was what they intended to do with what they saw. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button for more psychological horror that explores the darkness hiding in plain sight. What other trusted figures in your community might be harboring sinister motives? Share your thoughts in the comments below, but maybe keep the lights on while you type.